Okay, so thank you everyone who's joining live and watching later. It's a real privilege today to be able to have this conversation with Owais Awan, who is, I have to admit, we have a little bit of envy for this guy. He's younger than all of us, and as a lawyer, he's already markedly more successful than we are at the Nonhuman Rights Project, despite our thousands of hours of work. So, of course, I'm joking, but it's a real honor and privilege to. I'm sure most of you know Owais's name from hearing about Kaavan's case. Owais is a lawyer in Pakistan, and he came to our attention, came to the world's attention last year when the High Court in Islamabad, Pakistan, issued a historic ruling that, among other things, sent Kaavan, a male elephant who's been in solitary captivity for many years and was really suffering in a zoo, and he's now, not to spoil the surprise, but living happily at a sanctuary. So, but before we get into all that, my name is Kevin Schneider. I'm the executive director of the Nonhuman Rights Project and one of our attorneys, including on Happy's case right now, which we'll talk about a bit later. And I'm calling from New York City today, where I live and work, and sometimes go outside, but sometimes. So I want to introduce, like I said, Owais Awan, our guest today, our very esteemed guest. And he was hired to give a little background by a group, Free the Wild, which is fortunate to also have the support of Cher. And also I know Annika and some other folks who have been very much involved with Kaavan's case for years, really. So this is this was, I think, the culmination of a lot of efforts. So Owais, please tell non-human rights folks about yourself, how you became a lawyer, and basically how you came to care about animal rights, and then we'll get into Kaavan's case after.
So hello everyone, and thank you, Kevin, for such a nice introduction. Let me just clarify from the beginning that I would like to think I'm a student of law for life, and I'm still learning. And I'll be very, very honest with you. I think the stars were in Kaavan's favor, and we were lucky to have a bench, a judge who was so receptive to this issue. And the best part about all of this was that I've learned so much. It's been an enriching process, and it was a collective effort. It was a result of a collective effort and collective conscience. So yeah, thank you so much again for your introduction. To everyone who's with us, my name is Owais. I am calling from Islamabad, Pakistan right now. I'm an advocate, High Court based in Islamabad and other cities. So I graduated from Cardiff University in 2015. And to be very honest, back when I was studying, I had never thought I would be getting into animal law. And I mean, there were no courses offered for that matter. But once I joined the profession, I started off with environmental petitions, and wildlife was an area of interest. And one thing led to another. As they say, you don't choose the ghetto life chooses you. So I think with me, even it happened that I just took the initiative with Kaavan's petition and another one. And after filing the petition, I found out that my birthday is on the same day as World Animal Day. So, I was meant to do this. Yeah. Back to you, Kevin.
That's great. So with Kaavan's case specifically, and I hope for everyone listening that we have time for some of your questions too. So you can type them in, and Mickey can read those out to us as they come up. But in Kaavan's case, when you took it on, and please give a little more background, because it wasn't just, I mean, Kaavan is the kind of a real source of interest for us in particular because of the analogies to Happy's case, and other cases that we've filed for elephants in the United States. But it was quite a bit broader than that, right? The effort was actually aimed at the entire zoo, right?
Uh, so, when in context of animal welfare, uh, as you know that either a constitution of a country would expressly recognize animal sentience or it would not. So now when I was approached to do the case, I researched and I found out that there were next to none precedents and case law relating to animal rights and animal law. And that was primarily because there's no mention of non-human animals in the constitution. So, the petition, the kind of petition I did in the Islamabad High Court, it was a public interest petition. With public interest petition, you can never be too calculated, because part of doing that petition is to raise awareness and make that issue uh, in the discourse, or bring it into the discourse. So one of the main prayers of the petition was to recognize animal rights, animal sentience within the constitutional framework of Pakistan. And with the zoo specifically, because in a petition, a lawyer would never try to indulge in policy making areas, because that's not the duty of the courts. But somehow, when the proceedings went on and so many things were uncovered, so many issues, administrative issues with the zoo came about. There were different authorities fighting over the zoo. Uh, so, in light of all of that, it was decided to close down the zoo, and to send all of the animals to their respective sanctuaries. And if the government is to have another zoo or a sanctuary or anything in that place, then it was directed by the court that it should be up to international standards. So to say that the zoo has been closed down, yes, it has been closed down temporarily, but the government is planning to revamp it, and they've announced that they'll be making it the zoo into a wildlife conservation center, and which should be up to international standards.
Very interesting. So we continue to track the case ourselves. There have been quite a number of developments we'll talk about a little bit later, because there was the initial judgment that was so great from Justice Minallah, and excuse me if I'm mispronouncing. But then there were a number of follow-on judgments. So it's interesting what you say about the zoo getting up to international standards and what that might mean, because we've seen those same standards at work in, for example, the Bronx Zoo, and they're not worth a whole lot from our perspective. But that's a conversation for another day. But in that sense, Kaavan is very fortunate that not only did he get this declaration, but he's since, after and following a lot of kind of, and I don't know how much you can talk about, but we'd all like to hear about what went on outside of the context of the case, the kind of negotiations that had to happen in order to get Kaavan moved to where he ultimately was. We were actually, in a very small way, part of that, and with your help, we urged the court to send Kaavan to Cambodia, and they ultimately did that, and because of that, we've kept up a correspondence of sorts with the judge in Pakistan, which has been very interesting. And we noticed that in the decision, he cites Happy's case 9 times, or talks about Happy 9 times, which we've already tried to put to work in Happy's case here back in New York, to say, look, on the other side of the world, you have judges not only reaching conclusions that we want, but also specifically talking about Happy's case. So with all that, I want to just take a second for folks who may not have read it, just to read a couple of excerpts from the opinion of last year, the first one that really made history. So it was striking when we read it that it begins by citing the Prophet Muhammad. It says, quote, "A good deed done to an animal is as meritorious as a good deed done to a human being, while an act of cruelty to an animal is as bad as an act of cruelty to a human being." And then, immediately from that starting place, the judge talks about, and I'm quoting here, the pandemic, of course, COVID, seems to have changed the world for the time being. Has nature forced the human race to go into captivity so as to make it realize its dependence for survival on other beings possessed with a similar gift, i.e. life? Is it an opportunity for humans to introspect and relate to the pain and distress suffered by other living beings, animal species, when they are subjugated and kept in captivity and denied the conditions and habitats created for their survival by the Creator, merely for momentary entertainment? So was for us as lawyers, we read this as kind of a spoiler alert. We read that, we're like, wait, this is going to actually this could be good. So it goes on from there, but I'll just stop there. What was your reaction when you first read the judgment yourself?
Well, I was pretty overwhelmed. I was ecstatic. I was on cloud nine, and it felt like it was too good to be true, kind of a situation. And honestly, I could not have envisaged a verdict in this. And that was like the half part of the challenge. Like I said, since the Constitution isn't recognizing animal rights, to get animal rights within that framework of fundamental rights, um, we managed to do that based on the environmental eco jurisprudence which has been laid down by Pakistani courts since late 90s. In 1996, the Supreme Court of Pakistan um, held that right to a healthy and clean environment is a fundamental right under Article 9, which is right to life. And life does not mean a vegetative state of being, but it includes all facets of human existence. And because environment and this precedent was developed, but from a very climate change environmental perspective, and we tried to bring wildlife into this. We had all our arguments from the very basic one, which is that um, we can keep a human centric approach towards this. Uh, the fact that the animals around us need to be happy, which is actually beneficial to us. So that was part one. And in the judgment, it did not categorically say that the elephant should be moved to a sanctuary in Cambodia. The judgment said that the elephant should be moved to a sanctuary within or outside Pakistan. Now, after that, a committee was formed by the government. I was part of that committee, and initially they wanted to keep Kaavan and have a sanctuary for him over here. Now, Asian elephants in context of Pakistan, that's very interesting because Pakistan, unfortunately, is the only country where Asian elephants have gone extinct. So otherwise, they were very much part of our ethos and our history. And somewhere down the line, and there's hardly any research, but somewhere down the line, Asian elephants stopped existing in the region of Pakistan. But there were old laws, there were old sanctuaries which are now abandoned, uh, where elephants existed. So, and since Kaavan was the only Asian elephant over here, um, so obviously a sanctuary for one elephant was not a feasible solution. So then we had to decide to move him abroad. And then we had some options: Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Cambodia. Now Sri Lanka, this point was raised later. I raised this point that since Kaavan was a diplomatic gift, Kaavan was given by the government of Sri Lanka in 1985. So I raised whether it would be diplomatically ethical to return it back to Sri Lanka. Uh, and, and, And the other thing, I was told that in Sri Lanka there aren't any protected contact sanctuaries. Most of the sanctuaries over there are direct contact. They're operating on a direct contact system, and because Kaavan required a certain amount of rehabilitation, so it was best to keep him in a sanctuary which is on protected contact basis. So then ultimately Cambodia was decided, and but I think the judgment part was just half of the victory. I wasn't celebrating because I wanted to celebrate after Kaavan had successfully reintegrated. I think the post judgment part from May 2020 to November 2020, when Kaavan was finally relocated, I think that was very challenging in itself. Um, we had to face um, this very hardline, I call it the anti-relocation lobby, which consisted of environmental people, scientists, government people, who thought that we can still keep Kaavan over here, and they thought that sending Kaavan was in fact a matter of shame, as if the world will look at it that Pakistan cannot look after their animals, and that lobby resisted till the last day. But it was amazing how organically and how one thing led to another. Free the Wild was, and all of this was being done during a pandemic. So that international travel restrictions, all of that was going on the side. But then Free the Wild came in the picture. They took the responsibility. Four Paws International collaborated with Free the Wild. They sent in their team, and we started off with a medical examination first, where to declare Kaavan as fit to travel or not. That medical examination was done in August 2020, and then his crate was built, and then there was a 1 month, 2 month time of training with the crate, and the next thing we know, he was off and in an Ilyushin 76, uh, uh, because Kaavan's big, so there were other options in planes too, but Kaavan managed to go on one of the biggest aircrafts out there. So yeah, back to you, Kevin.
No, it's really amazing. And for folks who haven't, I'm sure most of you have, but there was some really great media that came out about the whole process, from monks I saw welcoming him and his crate when he arrived in Cambodia, and there was a send-off, rather beautiful send-off for him, and then Cher singing to him. So the whole thing was quite, and I think we have, Mickey, I know people have seen the sad pictures, so maybe we can just skip to one or two of the happy after pictures.
Yeah, absolutely.
While we're talking here. So while Mickey's pulling those up, I just wanted to read a couple more quotes from not the first opinion, but this came out. Must have been November, right? The decision where the judge decided on Cambodia for Kaavan. So he said at one point, speaking of Kaavan and the two brown bears who were also a subject of the petition, they should never have been deprived of their natural habitats. Captivity, even in the most adequately equipped zoo, and regardless of the quality of care, is certainly not a substitute for living beings to live in their respective natural habitats. Keeping them caged is unnatural, against the scheme of nature, and violates their natural rights, because only a natural habitat can provide for the behavioral, social, and physiological needs of a particular animal species. And then goes on to say about Kaavan's move, his relocation is symbolic. It is a message for the human race that it is not humane to deprive animal species of their respective natural habitats. It is a declaration that protecting animal species in their respective natural habitats amounts to preventing the extinction of the human species on this planet. Wow, seems like the more Judge Minallah writes about this issue, the more, pointed and kind of I'm wondering if we can, if he ever wants sick of being a judge, we can hire him somehow, because he's I mean, it's quite. What do you think led him to as much as you can kind of, and we know how hard it is from our own experience to guess what might be going on in a judge's head, but to the extent that you can, what do you think's going on there in his thought process, and do you think it can be spread to other judges in Pakistan and elsewhere?
Uh, so yeah, it's very interesting because I believe the whole debate and narrative, uh, in the end, became that whether in 21st century zoos have become an outdated concept or not. Uh, this is the ongoing trend right now. This is the level of understanding of captive animals, that whether zoos have become outdated in 21st century, whether we need zoos the way they are. And I love one of the expressions which the Justice Athar Minallah used was menagerie. These were just exhibitions of animals for commercial profit, and there was absolutely no care uh, for animal husbandry. There was no facilities, nothing of that sort, and there were not even the basic things like enrichments. I'm not going to delve into the argument whether there should be zoos or not. Because I'm not an expert. We're not experts, but uh, as long as ethical captive treatment is met, you know, you can call it a sanctuary, you can call it a zoo, you can call it a safari park. These are all nomenclatures. Uh, but it's really amazing how the narrative and the discussion, as when I filed the petition, was from zero to whether there should be zoos or not, and it did create a ripple effect, because after Kaavan's judgment, similar petitions have been filed in other high courts of Pakistan. So there's one pending in Karachi, there's one pending in Peshawar, and more or less people are now demanding that we can have sanctuaries, but zoos in 21st century are an outdated concept.
Yeah, it's really inspiring to see how advanced judges are. We're just waiting for some of our own judges here in the U.S. to get to the point where they're, really. I mean, it sounds like a joke, but it's very true. And just to talk a bit about, to give folks a update on Happy's case, which is now going into its third year, which is crazy to think about. But even we who are used to these kind of cases taking forever, it can be a lot. But we've gone through the trial court. I'm sure a lot of you have read some of the great findings that we got there. But we're faced with a different problem. It's complicated. Won't get too much into the differences, but to hear Owais talk about the Constitution of Pakistan, that doesn't, our cases, while we're looking for a very similar, we have very similar goal in mind, and we're even operating on a lot of the same legal principles, because Pakistan is a fellow common law country along with us. Of course, thanks Great Britain, so. But our case, of course, is different. It's built on the common law. We use habeas corpus, and so there are a lot of distinctions in there. But all that being said, that hasn't stopped us from trying to put this decision and any other decision that comes out around the world to work for Happy and for animals in the U.S. and New York. And we just filed a motion in Happy's case to seeking leave, what's called leave to appeal to the Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in New York. This is the first time we've taken Happy's case to this court, but starting back in 2014, we tried 3 times to get habeas appeals from our chimpanzee cases up to this same court, which led in 2018 to a concurring opinion from one of the judges on that court. Sure, a lot of you have heard the name Eugene Fahey, the judge in question. So he wrote this really rather stirring opinion, which is, we think, is basically as close as we've come so far to what you were able to accomplish in Pakistan. And that same judge is going to be considering our motion in Happy's case. So, you know, without going out too far on a limb, we're cautiously optimistic that, you know, having that judge rule in Happy's case, but also being able to point to, because one of the factors we have to convince the court of is that this is a matter, you know, Happy's case, the question of whether a non-human animal can have a right to liberty or any other right is a matter of, you know, great significance, not just here in New York. And we cite all these different media reports and different things, but also around the world, you know, in courtrooms and where you have judges like Judge Minallah citing Happy's case specifically in reaching a conclusion that an Asian elephant has to be sent to a sanctuary. So we expect a ruling on that in the next couple months. But, you know, whatever happens in that case, we will continue on. And I think, you know, we're very much confident that it's basically a matter of time before judges begin, you know, finally accepting the reasoning and agreeing that at least some animals can have rights. And so now I want to transition a little bit and ask you about a little bit more about what happened outside of the courtroom. And because I know that, like I said at the top, there are some folks here that have been involved for a long time in, you know, spreading the message about Kaavan specifically. So what we know from our experience that, you know, having grassroots efforts going on, whether it's for Happy or any other client of ours, is very important. You know, judges don't exist in a vacuum as much as we sometimes think of them as, you know, doing that, you know, but they're very much, or can be, sensitive to, you know, shifts in public understanding and the way that media and social media and different people talk about things. So do you think, or how do you think in Kaavan's case and in your work so far, how has having, you know, grassroots support, how do you think that has played into at all the kind of judgments you've been able to get?
Absolutely, the civil society played a huge role in this. The first time protest ever happened for Islamabad Zoo, for the state of affairs over there, was back in 2010 and 11, when residents of Islamabad got together and they protested over the, you know, horrible conditions. And that campaign went on, and for Kaavan especially, it started in, I would say, in somewhere around 2014-15, when an online petition was initiated, and Cher started tweeting about it. And the first time Free the Wild's team visited, and then 2016, a team from Four Paws visited to do an independent examination. So, I mean, have to admit that on a grassroots level, all of this could not have been possible without the efforts made by civil. And
Yep.
while on the other hand, there was this contrary perspective as well. You know, I saw so many posts and messages and tweets where people were actually sad that the zoo has been closed down. People were like, you know, our children are being deprived of, you know, learning about wildlife and conservation. And some people messaged me that, hey, can we please just go see the elephant? My kids want to see that. So there was this other perspective as well, and the zoo authorities, the zoo management especially, was quite hostile because they thought we were coming after their livelihood, which wasn't the case at all. But they were hostile as well. But I think just because the whole idea of retiring an elephant was such an alien concept, and no one could really see that actually happening, that it kind of hit the authorities and the people once Kaavan had left. That okay, now this is how things can be done, and especially when we saw Kaavan's progress. in Cambodia that within I would say couple of days his stereotypical behavior of swaying reduced by at least 80-90%. That was like unbelievable for me that he was swaying for the past at least 35 years in Islamabad, and as soon as he was sent to a sanctuary, his stereotypical behavior was reduced, which only proves that they heal. Sanctuaries heal animals for sure. And one thing I would just like to comment as far as Happy's case is concerned, I think the novel approach by Steve, by NhRP, of filing habeas corpus is, I think you guys are way ahead of the times that we're living in. Definitely, I see animal rights becoming part of our discourse very soon. Sooner or later, it will happen. Right now, the confusion I feel is just because there's so many levels of understanding and perspective towards animal rights. It's hard to draw the line that okay, now where do we start recognizing the rights from? Like you said, whether it should be some animals, whether it should be all animals, etc. So, but just like how slavery was abolished, how civil rights movement have gone, I think it's just a matter of years that animal rights, animal care will be very well within our discourse. And logically, a habeas corpus is the most appropriate form of petition that should have been done. But although I did not take that route, I wasn't bold enough to do that. I thought to keep a different strategy. As you know, we went for a writ of mandamus, which is just getting a direction for the authority to do something in a specific manner. So, but it's amazing what you still have been able to achieve.
Well, thank you so much for the kind words, but maybe we'll have to think about our next lawsuit. Maybe we'll have to do some experimenting. But no, you're right, and I think a lot remains to be seen. I think we have theories, and the law is logical up to a certain point, but we know that it also isn't. It's emotional, it's philosophical, it's all these other things, religious. So yeah, for us, basically, having these judges say no to us, it doesn't deter us. It might momentarily sting, but it doesn't stop us. So, and people like you are an inspiration to keep us going. So thank you for that. And this is another quote from the original opinion that I wanted to get to because I think it kind of encapsulates a lot of what we've been talking about here for the last few minutes. And I'm sure a lot of folks have seen it. It was even in the very nice poster that we did, or whatever, Instagram post to advertise this talk, when Justice Minallah writes, the answer to this question, whether animals have rights, without any hesitation is in the affirmative. He goes on to say that human rights are inherent because they stem from the attribute of being alive. Life, therefore, is the premise of the existence of a right. Whether human rights or rights guaranteed expressly under the Constitution, they all have a nexus with life. An object or thing without life has no right. A living being, on the other hand, has rights because of the gift of life. So, that's a really inspiring thing to read from a judge. It also it's very broad, right? So how far does that go? Have you seen already in other cases where other courts have discussed the Kaavan case, or you've seen other advocates use it, or is it still a little too early to see how much this might be able to be picked up by other, how will this stand as precedent, basically, in other cases?
Yeah, so one of my favorite comments and quotes by the Honorable Justice Minallah is that anything which breathes have rights. Well, in all honesty, yes, it is broad because this is the environmental eco jurisprudence which has been developed in Pakistan that life is a very broad, life has a very broad-based meaning and understanding and interpretation towards it. What happens in other high courts, I cannot say, because really in common law, the ideology and the thought process of a judge really makes a difference. And in academically, some people were still against closing down of zoos and so on and so forth. So we don't know what's going to happen, but definitely we can be cautiously optimistic that it will lead to better things. It will, if this is a start. We can say that animal jurisprudence in Pakistan will now start to get shape and will probably be digged into more, and hopefully good things will happen from here.
So thank you for that. Another question, and maybe you've heard some of this already when you were going through earlier about some of the objections you heard from people, things like, well, my kid won't be able to see an animal. How are they going to care about conservation? These are all very familiar. We hear these kinds of things ourselves. We also hear from time to time an objection along the lines of, look how bad the situation is for human rights. How is this helping things to be fighting cases for animals? Is this, so what are your thoughts when you hear something like that? And, how do you feel?
Firstly, I try to ignore them. We can't argue with everyone. It just gets too draining. But my first logical argument towards them is that how Islam talks about animal rights and how Islam recognizes animal sentience, and there's so many verses and sayings of Prophet Muhammad where personhood of animals have been talked about. One of the quotes you mentioned. So I say that it's a religious obligation to, because most of the majority over here are Muslims. So I say it's a religious obligation to be kind to animals. And then secondly, I try to uh, make them understand that it's actually our benefit that the animals around us are happy, because they will create this good karma. And if an animal around me is in distress or unhappy or suffering, obviously it will create this bad karma and it will affect us. So yeah. But this argument actually is one of the most common arguments, that, oh, the state of human rights are so bad and you want to, and in fact during the whole process, you also used to ask me that, why are you spending so much money over one elephant? You can use that money for XYZ, you can do that so much from that money. And I had to tell that because this is so important symbolically, that doing this is actually raising our level of consciousness, as I would say, in understanding fundamental rights and in being mindful of our surroundings and environment.
That's a great answer. I was taking some notes because it's an issue that we face all the time, and we actually have our own kind of exciting development on that front. For the first time, a group of Catholic theologians are actually doing what's called amicus brief in favor of our case, and so we've had legal experts, habeas corpus experts, philosophers, and now we have religious folks, at least coming from a Catholic perspective, and talking about the Bible, and shares roots with Judaism as well. And it's a very similar, maybe not so surprising, it's a similar set of kind of directions, basically that how they interpret and what they focus on and emphasize is very much the same thing. So we're excited to see how basically continuing to throw every kind of angle at judges to get them to understand that this issue that, on the face of it might seem, you're talking about animals, all that's going on in the world. But when you really sit down and appreciate what's at stake and what's wrapped up in it all, it becomes pretty clear that it is something that, like you said, it's in people's self-interest at this point. It's very obvious, I think, that it's not about being nice to them. It's about staying alive ourselves in more, I think, more and more stark terms.
Yeah.
So
I feel, sorry to cut, but I feel that we have reached a point in mankind uh, that we are being forced to introspect our relation with nature. You know, we've been developing this globe, Earth, in the name of development, and all we're doing is deforestation and adding concrete, commercializing. And now, for the sake of our survival, I think we are being forced to look at our relation with nature and wildlife and environment in order to survive, basically. And yeah,
no,
sorry.
so it's a powerful argument that I think, and you mentioned several times eco-jurisprudence. That's a little less familiar to lawyers in the US. I think it's becoming more so, but we see a lot of, in particular in Latin American courts these days, a lot of even habeas petitions for non-human animals that have been successful, some of them, and there is this drawing in of rights of nature, of ecological jurisprudence. So that's something that we're trying to put to work ourselves. It's a little tricky in the U.S. context in a lot of ways, but I think there's a lot of potential there. So that's just one more kind of common ground area that we're trying to work on. And so what's next for you? And because you've set yourself a really high bar, and how can we help? How can folks listening, is there any way we can help?
I plan to contribute and be a useful member of the society, and I plan to do more animal related petitions. Some are already in the pipeline. I've done a couple already. Recently filed a case where I've impugned the authorities for exporting falcons, export of falcons and use of falcons for falconry and hunting of a rare species. So that's that. And through Free the Wild, we are trying to do a medical intervention for the elephants in Karachi Zoo and Safari Park. And I would also like to use this forum that if anyone would like to donate Free the Wild for the treatment of 4 African elephants in Karachi Zoo and Safari Park, please do so. I'll provide the link in a bit. So yeah, and on another project that I'm hopefully going to work on is stray dog population control. So I'm taking as it's coming. Let's see. But I also plan on studying. I haven't done my master's as yet. So I'm planning to do my master's in animal law and policy. So yeah, let's see where things go. Lead.
Well, that's great. And so we are here if we can be any help. So you know where to find us.
Thank you so much. No, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hoping to meet you once this maddening pandemic is over.
Likewise.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to open up now for any questions that folks have. I see we got quite a few people here. Okay, so I'll take this one. I see, can a victory or judgment like this, can this one be used in a U.S. court? Yes and no. It depends. I think that, at least in my experience, U.S. judges have a well-deserved reputation of being somewhere between ignorant of foreign law to hostile to foreign law. So we've had judges where we've been doing this for years in our cases in Connecticut and New York, and we're going to do it in other places. We cite to particularly Latin American cases. They were the first ones. You had the case of Sandra. That one's a little complicated, but the better example in a lot of ways is the case of Cecilia, which was a habeas corpus case where a chimpanzee was moved from a zoo in Argentina to a sanctuary in Brazil. And, you know, in a lot of ways, many ways, that's right on point with the cases we were doing at the time. We introduced it in our chimpanzee rights cases. And you get radio silence, or you get the judges, we try to, you know, a new decision comes out and we pay to have it translated and we rush it to them and we say, hey, look at this is relevant. And in the past, they've just denied it. They won't even look at it. But then again, you have judges who don't operate that way. And my personal feeling is that it's somewhat of a generational thing, not entirely, but I think that younger lawyers who are becoming judges are just much more attuned to these issues. They can see the reality of climate disaster happening before their eyes. They can see all these other things happening. You know, so I'm hopeful that that will kind of force judges to become more receptive to foreign law, because, you know, this planet is, I mean, a disease that starts in one place can be everywhere in like a month. So, you know, we're clearly very connected. So the idea that we can just go on ignoring what other courts have to say, I think is crazy. Owais, can you talk about how, I mean, from what we can see, judges in Pakistan and in other countries that we've looked at are nowhere near this hostile. In fact, they seem to actually, I know some countries' constitutions actually require or you know, encourage their judges to look to foreign law. So what, do you have any, you know, experience on that?
So being a common law country, we do cite and refer to other jurisdictions of common law, being India, UK, as well as US as well, because Pakistan is a federation. So we do refer to US judgments as well. But of course, they have persuasive value. They do not have binding value as such. I mean, a local precedent would be preferred over a precedent from another country. But I think because the principles of law are similar throughout the world, so wherever they can be used, they are used. A good judgment, I feel, will be used wherever it is and should be. That's how it should be.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you know, we won't, even if the judges don't want to hear it, like a lot of things we say, we just keep putting it in front of their faces until they either agree with us or they just give up or get tired of us and finally let us win. So that's part of our strategy here, as simple as that sounds. So there's tons of comments here. Thank you, everyone. A lot of them are just thanking you. I see the word tour de force. Have you been called a tour de force before? Congratulations. So let's see. I'm just trying to pull out some. So yeah, there was another question about strengthening law in other countries. So I hope we've addressed that. So it says, here's an interesting one about humanity being at a moment of reevaluating our relationship with nature. Can you talk, and I'm curious to hear what you think about what principles should guide people in our relations to nature?
Actually, I don't think I'm in a position to tell which principles, because I'm someone who believes in pluralism. And for instance, in Pakistan, if we have some different, being a Muslim, we would have different principles toward things. But I think the fundamentals really remain the same, that we should not try to harm others. We should not try to, I mean, I don't want to preach, that's not something what I do, but I believe in individuality. And I think the principles of respecting nature or being mindful of the environment are pretty much fundamental and global, really.
Yeah, we'd like to, I think a lot of people would like to see something like that written into our own constitution, but that's a whole other seminar. So what, have you seen any there's a question here about any reaction you've seen from religious leaders in Pakistan. I believe I've seen some fatwas that have been quite surprisingly pro-animal. I know around dogs. And so can you say anything about that? I'm very curious to hear.
For when they see Kaavan's success, and how quickly he's rehabilitating his progress, and that's when when they see, they believe it, and then that's when they appreciate. Initially, they were skeptical, but now because almost every day there's a post on Kaavan by Cambodia Wildlife Sanctuary, they're giving daily updates, and every day is touchwood, uh, much improvement in his overall condition. So I don't think there's there aren't many people who are criticizing this now.
That's great. I think that's in a lot of ways what we're waiting to see ourselves and expecting to see once we can break through, and hopefully it's for happy in the near future. We think that just the whole process, like you said, of people seeing it and seeing that it goes well, and can be a real transformative thing in itself. So that's really great to hear. So there's another question here about international agencies, the UN, how they might be able to help. It sounds like you actually had quite the, for us, yes, kind of, but we're not really at that point because we are so focused kind of narrowly on this idea of common law and personhood and habeas. It doesn't always lend itself to that kind of thing, but I think Owais, you have a much more relevant experience with this, having to negotiate an elephant around borders, and there's this fact of him being a diplomatic gift. And so what was the role of, and you mentioned them before, please mention organization Free the Wild and Four Paws. How is it having them and any other international organizations involved? Did you find that sounds like it couldn't have happened without them?
Absolutely. There was no burden on the government of Pakistan or its exchequer. It was completely people's initiative, started with Free the Wild. And initially, a different set of vets were supposed to come, but due to the travel restrictions, Four Paws was asked to join in, and then they collaborated, and that's how it happened. To answer the question whether there was international agencies, so unfortunately, animal rights is not within the agenda of organizations like UN, but there are some animal related organizations, I would say regulatory bodies like CITES, and there's World IE. But as far as the implementation part is concerned, I think CITES and these bodies are clearly lacking in scrutinizing and having a check and balance kind of a system on countries. However, I do feel the time's right that there should be some sort of a charter of animal, at least, which I personally like is are the five fundamental freedoms. I think there should be some kind of a charter which makes all the states to treat their animals better, and yeah.
Yeah, so we know some folks working on that, World Animal Net and lots of others. So we might be able to connect anyone who's interested in that if you want to follow up after. I think we got time for at least one more question here.
Kaavan.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, this one comes from one of our folks watching on Facebook. So they write, you mentioned younger judges may be more receptive to these arguments. So are there schools now introducing these kinds of issues in curriculums?
Oh, yeah, very much so. And a lot of it, as much as we can, we contribute to that ourselves. So Steve Wise, our founder and president, has been teaching in law schools around the world and around the US for the last 30 years. So we're doing our kind of small part. He's also over that time developed this ever evolving curriculum of cases. And the exciting thing is that, when he started, it was all theoretical. And over the years, we've been able to add our cases. And now we add cases like Owais's work, and then we add all these other new cases. So it's an exciting thing that it's actually happening before our eyes and really building. We're in the process of helping to build it. So definitely, and I myself, I went to law school. It was almost 10 years ago, but there was an animal law class there, which is fairly common. I mean, animal law, it gets a little complicated because it's one thing to talk about sort of welfare statutes, but it's quite another thing to talk about this question of, can a non-human animal have rights? Like, not welfare statutory protections, but actual, the way that a human person can be recognized in court and, you know, have their interests fought over and everything. So yeah, definitely. And Owais, I don't know if in your experience, have you seen younger judges or younger folks in the bar who are seeming to be more exposed to these issues and open-minded?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, I think Justice Athar Minallah is somewhere around 60 years old. So definitely he wasn't that young. But like I said, I think the narrative is changing now, and the younger this generation at least have opinions on animal welfare, on issues like zoos, and the trending narrative is that zoos are now outdated in 21st century.
So I got one more question I want to ask because it's very relevant to your work. And this is something I've been following myself regarding the street dogs and bears after the hearing. So what, if anything, is happening there? What do you think is next? And how can the judgment be built upon and, you know, to continue helping other animals in Pakistan?
So with Kaavan, although because he was the symbol of this movement, if I say, but the bears, there were two bears in the Islamabad Zoo. Their names were Susie and Bablu, and we managed to relocate them to species appropriate sanctuary in Jordan. It's being run by Princess Alia Foundation in collaboration with Four Paws in Al Aman, Jordan. So they have been relocated over there. And as far as the stray dogs issue, unfortunately, there are words in bylaws of municipal administration over here which says that stray dogs can be eliminated, and that is somehow translated into culling and shooting. So, but the good thing is that recently we've met the stakeholders and they are changing the bylaws. They're bringing about a policy change, and we are soon going to start, hopefully, a citywide and then a nationwide rabies-free program. And we will try to vaccine, neuter, spay as many dogs as possible.
Yeah, I know it's these issues are so tough, especially when it comes to actually on the ground helping animals. So that's yeah, I give you all the credit to take on, you know, issues like that. So I think we're just about done here, but I see these comments keep coming in and they're really good ones. And this, I think, is really interesting. Says Justice Minallah had a previous background in human rights work. And certainly we know that we kind of intuitively find that it's not always necessarily the animal lawyers who intuitively get what we're doing when we talk about personhood and rights, but rather it's the human rights lawyers who actually seem to really get it pretty quickly. And I think this, so to hear that is completely in keeping with kind of our perspective. And I don't know if you have anything on that or any other last notes or any other plugs you want to put in where people can follow or learn more, anything like that. But thank you so much for taking the time. I know it's getting a little late there. So thank you.
No, it's not as late it is for Mickey than it is for me, because apparently it's pretty late over there where Mickey is. No last words as such. I mean, I'm still, like I said, I'm still learning, and I feel I have a long way to go. But with having guidance from amazing folks like you, I feel we are on the right track. And let's see. The whole what I've really enjoyed by far is that it's been a very organic process, and I think that's really determined that it's the right way to go about it. So that's it really, and thank you everyone that who joined in. It really means a lot. and I'm always accessible on Twitter, and I drop my email as well. And hopefully, better things to do, more work to come, and more animals to rescue.
Okay, thank you so much. I just dropped your Twitter there, since you made that fair game, so everyone should follow you. And yeah, Mickey, is there anything else before we let folks go?
No, I think that's everything. Thank you so much. Some folk are asking for the donation link that you mentioned earlier. Maybe you could drop that in. And we'll send a follow-up email as well with all these links and the recording as well. So,
And please let us know if we can help with these other elephants, because yeah, I mean, there's so many of them out there, but whenever we can help, we want to. So
Thank you so much. Thank you.
okay, thank you everyone, and thank you Owais again.
All right, take care.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.